The most talented woman in Huajing, Xia Chaoqing, eloped with someone. As I was once taught by her grandfather, I couldn't bear to see the old gentleman heartbroken. So I had people searching everywhere for her. Who would have thought she'd be found at my husband's secret residence? Turns out, he was the one hiding her. Li Qianya, you madman. I had barely swallowed my medicinal broth when my consort, Ning Xiao, stormed in. Luckily, he bought his mistress's hideout so close to the princess's estate. If it had been farther, he might have missed seeing me entirely. I was idly running a nail painted with carmine red against the edge of a table. When I looked up, Ning Xiao's usually composed face was twisted in agony as he cradled the bloodied woman in his arms. She's the granddaughter of Grand Tutor Xia. How dare you treat her like this, Li Qianya? I'll report you to the emperor himself. Go ahead. I leaned back lazily on the couch. I'm curious to see what His Majesty will think about this. Rumors said Xia Chaoqing had eloped, but she turns up here in the capital, carrying my husband's child. Let's see what becomes of you two lovebirds then. Before we were married, I'd heard of Ning Xiao's childhood sweetheart, Xia Chaoqing. The two had grown up as classmates, admired by all as a perfectly matched pair. If not for my brother's imperial decree forcing our marriage, I wouldn't be playing the villain breaking up this love story. But alas, the world says Princess Wenhua is a jealous, intolerant woman. Now that the lady has not only been secretly kept but is 2 months pregnant, how could I allow such betrayal to stand? Shao, don't. Xia Chaoqing's face was pale as paper, on the verge of fainting. Tough girl. I clicked my tongue lightly and waved my hand. Xiao Zui immediately directed a few maids to pry the woman away from Ning Xiao's grasp and carry her out. Li Qianya, what more do you want? She's in this state already. Ning Xiao, red-eyed and trembling, was a man I had never seen before, panicked and vulnerable. Even as a princess, you cannot act so ruthlessly. So you remember I'm a princess, Ning Lang? My smile was gentle, but the chill in my eyes was unmistakable. At my signal, Xiao Zui gestured, and several guards entered, pinning him to the floor. Ning Xiao, a scholar official with nothing but ornamental martial art skills, was quickly subdued. His white robe was stained with blood as he struggled in vain. As a favor to the Empress, I'll let you off this time, I said, crouching slightly to pat his cheek with the back of my hand. My voice was light, but the weight of my words unmistakable. Don't think too highly of yourself. At the end of the day, you're nothing but a servant to the royal family. With that, I turned and left the cramped little residence. Even for keeping a mistress, the consort is stingy. He'll fail at everything this way, Xiao Zui muttered, massaging my temple. Her remarks struck me. Land in the capital is expensive. Where did he get the money to buy a house and keep someone? Check if he used funds from the princess's estate. If so, make the Empress pay me back. Ning Xiao was the Empress's cousin, and his rise to prominence was thanks to the powerful Ning family's influence. The estate houses hundreds of people. My salary alone isn't enough. Naturally, I need excuses to siphon money from these affluent families. Feeling no guilt, I squinted at Xiao Zui and changed the topic. How's Miss Xia doing? She's physically strong. The doctor said with regular medicine and rest, she'll recover quickly. Xiao Zui hesitated before lowering her voice. She asked you to be careful at tonight's banquet. Xia Chaoqing and Ning Xiao were indeed childhood friends, but mutual affection? That's another story. Grand Tutor Xia was a mentor to 3 generations of emperors, and Xia Chaoqing, his granddaughter, was famed as a prodigy and unparalleled talent. Her brilliance outshone her peers, leaving even the royal princesses reluctant to make her their study companion for fear of being overshadowed. Such an extraordinary woman suddenly disappeared, rumored to have eloped. Ning Xiao's gloomy demeanor in the months since drew no suspicion to himself. In truth, it was he who, under the guise of youthful affection, took her by force and held her captive with manipulative declarations of love. Though normally cautious, Ning Xiao took a daring risk by hiding her in a residence near the princess's estate, leading to my eventual discovery. After 2 months of confinement, Xia Chaoqing's spirit remained unbroken. She spent half an incense stick's time cursing Ning Xiao before calmly asking me to call a doctor to abort her child. "Miss Xia, you're far more interesting than Grand Tutor Xia," I remarked, offering her a deal. "I can help you get rid of Ning Xiao, but I don't do charity." And so, with Ning Xiao afraid to make any accusations and my reputation for ruthlessness well established, Xia Chaoqing joined my court as an advisor. Her first piece of advice? Be wary of tonight's banquet. The palace came alive as twilight fell, its lanterns glowing bright against the deepening night, the air filled with festive music and laughter. Seated at a table laden with exquisite dishes, I noticed Xiaozui's anxious, yet helpless gaze. The palace made responsible for preparing meals for the emperor and empress had fallen suddenly ill. In her place, Xiaozui had been summoned to assist. For an event like this, only 2 or 3 close attendants are usually allowed. With Xiaozui gone, I was left with just Hongyu by my side. Such a crude maneuver. I smiled faintly, uninterested in revealing my thoughts. Aside from the wine I had brought myself, I didn't touch anything else, not even the dishes I normally favored, nor the performances that would usually hold my attention. Midway through the banquet, I led Hongyu outside for a short walk to clear my mind. The breeze in the pavilion was growing uncomfortably warm. Frowning, I began to notice a strange lethargy in my mind, a fog creeping in, persistent and invasive. It clicked in my head when I recalled the strong scent from the sleeve of a dancer earlier, wafting as she waved at me. The perfume. It wasn't just fragrance. "Don't alert anyone. It'll only scare off the snake in hiding," I whispered, gripping Hongyu's hand. "Go and prepare the carriage. Bring the men stationed outside Shengtian Palace here. I'll wait here for now." The pavilion was far enough from the main hall to avoid immediate detection. I had hoped to leave discreetly, but I underestimated the potency of the drug. The palace's schemes are rarely new to me, and I knew the consequences of succumbing to this rising heat in my body. If this went on, I would lose control completely.
No.
I had to find a secluded spot to hide. Biting down hard on my lip to ground myself, I staggered away, determined to put distance between myself and prying eyes. Yet, my unsteady feet betrayed me, and I tripped on the hem of my gown. A pair of steady hands caught me just in time. I looked up briefly, and was met with a strikingly handsome face, though my dazed mind couldn't place a name to it. "Your Highness, are you unwell?" The man was tall, his presence shielding me from the curious stares of nearby attendants. Yet, his tone was distant, as if the gesture had been out of sheer reflex. "I'll summon someone to assist." "Stop," I snapped, grabbing his arm with a force belying my weakened state. Taking a deep breath, I struggled to articulate my instructions as the heat clawed at my consciousness. "There's an ice cellar just a short distance to the right. Take me there, and I'll reward you generously afterward." To ensure I stayed alert, I grabbed his sword from his waist and slashed it against my arm, the sharp sting of pain anchoring me briefly. The world around me alternated between chaos and quiet. I heard faint whispers of "Your Highness," mixed with cries of "The princess is dead." The sensations reminded me of my previous life, of the sword that had pierced my chest during a palace banquet, of the overwhelming noise and my fading breaths. I've lived 2 lives, a secret I've kept from everyone. In my past life, I was notorious, despised by all. And so, when I was stabbed at a chaotic court gathering, my death was met with relief, an end to the princess who had long plagued the people. Yet, to my surprise, even a villain like me was granted a second chance. This rebirth opened my eyes to my true role, a scapegoat for the imperial family. Regardless of whether I committed the crimes, as long as the blame landed on me, the emperor would absolve everyone else. My imperial brother's indulgence was no kindness. It was tacit approval of every accusation hurled my way. In my previous life, I realized the truth too late. But this time, I was determined to chart a different course. Under the guise of indulging in absurd hobbies, I quietly uprooted spies and informants around me, replacing them with loyal allies like Xie Chaoqing. Tonight's events, however, caught me off guard. Inside the ice cellar, I smashed open a barrel of ice, stuffing a handful of shards into my mouth. The biting cold cleared my mind, and I wiped the sweat from my brow as I turned to find the man still standing there. "What are you still doing here?" I asked, my voice tinged with irritation I hadn't intended. The man, dressed in a dark military robe with a crimson leather belt at his waist, looked every bit the part of a disciplined officer. His broad shoulders and long legs made his imposing stature even more evident. Though his face was unfamiliar, I couldn't deny his striking features, particularly his sharp, penetrating gaze. "I asked which family you belong to," I said impatiently. "I'll send someone to deliver your reward later. Now leave." The confined air in the ice cellar did little to cool my growing frustration. Using a piece of cloth, I hastily wrapped the wound on my arm. The man finally spoke. "My name is Gu Xingyan." "Gu Xingyan?" I couldn't recall the name immediately, so I waved him off. "Got it. Now get lost." Gu Xingyan raised an eyebrow and added, "Your Highness, you're still holding my sword. If someone were to see us now, it'd be difficult to explain." The distinct craftsmanship of a general's blade made it easily recognizable. Hearing approaching footsteps outside, I released the sword as if it had burned me, expecting it to hit the floor. Yet, Gu Xingyan caught it effortlessly, his swift movements unnervingly precise. Bowing slightly, he said with an air of detachment, "I'll take my leave. Your Highness, take care." By the time Hong Yu and the others arrived, the ice cellar was empty save for me. As physicians and servants knelt in a flurry around me, tending to my wounds and administering medicine, I finally remembered to ask, "Who is this banquet in honor of?" The general, Gu Xingyan, returning from the northern battlefield to report his victories, Hong Yu answered. The medication took effect, and I began to piece together the details. Since the northern frontier was invaded, the court had been divided between factions advocating for war or peace. Initially, the emperor favored appeasement, but when public outcry grew too loud, he reluctantly heeded the empress's suggestion and sent Gu Xingyan to the front. A mere youth at the time, Gu Xingyan had stunned the court by reclaiming Qingmu City in his first battle with a force of just 1,000 riders. Over the next 2 years, his 6 consecutive victories left the capital's elite speechless. Even the northern Khagan was outraged by his losses, ceasing all tribute payments in protest. Furious at the disruption of his income, my imperial brother hastily summoned Gu Xingyan back, leading to tonight's banquet. In my previous life, however, Gu Xingyan's triumphant return was short-lived. He died under mysterious circumstances not long after, allegedly falling ill after a banquet. A tragedy orchestrated, no doubt, by my imperial brother. Gu Xingyan, as it turned out, was aligned with the empress. The princess was attacked during the banquet at Shengtian Palace. Several waves of imperial doctors arrived, under the pretense of concern from the emperor and empress. I feigned outrage, scolded them, and then had them sent away. Xie Zhaoqing had warned me to be cautious, which clearly meant the news had come from Ning Xiao recently. It was now clear who was trying to set me up. But Gu Xingyan, being aligned with the empress, made me wonder, was his action yesterday truly to help me, or was he following orders with some other intention? This matter was soon resolved through Ning Xiao. According to Xiao Chui, he had been wandering around the east courtyard these past few days but dared not enter. In the end, he came under the pretense of the empress organizing a polo match, and only then did he step inside to dine with me. "I heard you were injured in the assassination attempt. Are you all right?" Ning Xiao awkwardly asked after a long pause, trying to sound concerned. To ease the tension, he even picked up some shrimp for me. "It's nothing serious. No need to trouble the prince consort," I replied coldly. After all, assassination attempts were not uncommon among the royal family and high-ranking officials. That's good then. Ning Xiao nodded, as if preparing to probe further, but his words meandered, failing to get to the point. The reception banquet was specifically organized by Her Majesty for General Gu, but you were put in danger. She feels very guilty. Your sister-in-law is overthinking. I quickly shifted the topic. That long-sleeve bow dance at the banquet was excellent. I quite liked those dancers. Ning Xiao froze for a moment, quietly sipping his soup before casually continuing. If you had stayed inside the hall for the whole evening, you wouldn't have been attacked. Then I would have missed the chance to talk with General Gu. That would have been such a pity. I smiled. Ning Xiao furrowed his brows. Gu Xingyan? You saw him outside the hall. His surprise seemed genuine, meaning that Gu Xingyan hadn't told the Empress about the events of that night. Apparently, there was a divide within the Empress's faction. I was in a good mood. Yes, luckily, General Gu was there. He kept me from losing my life. Gu Xingyan is a rising star among generals with excellent martial skills. Yet under his protection, you still got hurt? Ning Xiao sneered, unable to hide his sarcasm. Seems he doesn't care much whether you live or die. His words had no effect on me. I took my time rinsing my mouth, wiped my lips with a silk napkin, and stood up. I heard the Xie family is still searching for their daughter. Would the prince consort like to provide any clues? That was a direct hit to Ning Xiao. He glared at the shrimp in my bowl and gritted his teeth. It's your doing. Why are you asking me? So much for the deep affection we were supposed to share. Just a few days ago, he had claimed to care, yet now he was indifferent. I was still reeling from Ning Xiao's cold heart when I heard him speak again in a cold tone. Gu Xingyan has someone else he cares about. You should give up on him. Since we've been married, Ning Xiao and I have always lived apart. He kept a concubine, and I had my own lovers. The fact that we were on bad terms was no secret. But now, even Xiao Cui couldn't help but advise me. Your Highness, General Gu already has a childhood sweetheart. You should let it go. When it came to the question of whether childhood affection equaled love, Xie Zhaoqing had something to say about it. Hong Yu continued, what if, in the end, this bet can't be won? Does the princess have any brave warriors in the palace who can challenge General Gu? So they didn't support me because they feared they would lose. I fell silent, while Xiao Cui and Hong Yu secretly high-fived behind me. The Empress, dressed in a phoenix robe and crown, entered the palace surrounded by servants. Upon seeing me, she feigned concern. Wenhua, is your injury better? She greeted me in the same way as her cousin. It's nearly healed, nothing to worry about. My gaze fell on Gu Xingyan, who stood behind her. Will the general participate in the match later? General Xingyan was injured on the battlefield and hasn't fully recovered, the Empress said, as though she had learned of my thoughts from Ning Xiao. She casually glanced at the polo field. He's here today specifically to see Miss Yu. Miss Yu, the daughter of General Yu Xian, Xiao Cui whispered. My expression changed slightly. With Gu Xingyan and now General Yu's daughter, the Empress certainly had no shortage of military support. So, General Gu is betting on Miss Yu to win? I took a sip of my tea. Gu Xingyan turned his head and raised an eyebrow. No, I'm betting on the prince consort. Well, in that case, I'll bet on Miss Yu. I smiled, my eyes sparkling as I instructed Xiao Cui to place the bet. Your Majesty, I believe you completely. Don't worry, that girl plays polo excellently. You'll win the bet for sure. The Empress looked over at Ning Xiao in the stands and smiled. Compared to her, the prince consort is far behind. As for polo, it's actually Xie Taifu's grandson who's really good. I sighed lightly, as if making a casual remark. It's a pity that because of his sister's issues, he's been keeping to himself and hasn't come to the polo match. The Empress seemed uninterested in Xie Zhaoqing. Anyone capable of eloping with such disgraceful behavior, in my opinion, never deserved the title of a talented woman. I took another sip of tea to hide the smile that was creeping onto my lips, not continuing the conversation. Xie Zhaoqing was now completely safe. When I lifted my gaze again, I unexpectedly caught Gu Xingyan's eyes. When he didn't speak, his gaze was deep and composed, exuding an air of maturity that reminded me of the teasing words he had whispered in my ear in the ice cellar. "I'll leave." The contrast was striking. Our eyes met, but after just a few seconds, he quickly looked away. I felt a little disappointed and shifted my focus back to the polo field. The Empress had been making quite a few moves lately. After the reception banquet, now, a polo match was taking place. It seemed she was trying to help Gu Xingyan establish himself once again in front of everyone after his return to Huajing, showcasing how much importance they placed on him. But their plan to promote him as a military leader would likely fail, as my older brother would never let Gu Xingyan lead troops again. Hooves thundered across the grass, and with the final ball going into the goal, the bright and poised young woman indeed claimed the victory. I turned on my heel, not allowing anyone to follow, and decided to meet Gu Xingyan's so-called heartfelt person. On the east side of the field, a group of young noblemen gathered. Yu Xian stood a little farther away, dressed in a sleek red polo outfit, her tall ponytail swaying in the breeze, immediately drawing everyone's attention. I took a few small steps and, just as I got closer, I saw Gu Xingyan standing next to her. They didn't try to hide their conversation, and their voices reached my ears clearly. That was the princess, right on the right side of the high platform? Seeing Gu Xingyan nod, Yu Xian continued excitedly. "I haven't seen Her Highness in so long. She still looks as elegant as ever. So beautiful. I can't stop staring." As if hearing something funny, Gu Xingyan's thin lips curled into a half smile and he replied, "Do you have an eye disease? The sky might fall, but at least you've got your mouth to cover it, eye disease." Yu Xian rolled her eyes, suddenly noticing me standing in front of them. Her breath hitched. "Your Highness." I gave a slight nod, offering a polite and appreciative smile, and then completely ignored Gu Xingyan standing beside her. Unfortunately, before I could have more conversations with the perceptive young lady from the Yu family, my elder brother urgently summoned me to the palace. "You've been quite docile recently, and the impeachment petitions have decreased." "I'm not used to it," came the voice from behind the screen, while a pile of memorials lay carelessly on the Zeton wood desk. Changing his usual arrogant demeanor, he spoke from behind the screen. Under the watchful eyes of the eunuchs and court officials, I respectfully knelt down, saying, "Your servant is foolish and has fallen into the trap set by the Ning family. The Ning family is powerful, and they are full of treacherous officials. That's why the crown prince, at such a young age, has already been dragged into factional struggles, and the other princes follow suit." He sighed deeply. "Wenhua, you're the only one I can trust." I lowered my head and said nothing in reply. His words were 3 parts sincere and 7 parts flattering. After all, during the battle for the throne, the situation was so dire that when the eunuchs brought the hiding emperor out, most of the officials did not acknowledge him. It was I who led the way in kneeling and shouting, "Long live the emperor." That was why I, once the most beloved princess of a late emperor, had transformed into the most cherished sister of the new emperor. Even the era named Chongjia was chosen by me. "Do you know about the matter with Grand Tutor Xie's granddaughter?" "I've heard a little about it." Not only had I heard, but she was currently with me. The old man just came to see me. "He looks much more haggard," Emperor Chongjia said as he came out from behind the screen and helped me up. But he didn't come to ask me for help in finding someone. Instead, he submitted a memorial requesting action on the Xinzhou disaster and plague. This year, the southern region had experienced severe flooding, which caused the water levels of the Great River and Xujiang to rise drastically. The Jinsha levee in Xinzhou was breached, and the floodwaters instantly submerged several counties, destroying homes and farmlands, leading to a great number of refugees. The court had dispatched several groups of people to repair the levees, and just as the floods seemed to subside, a plague broke out. My suggestion is simple. Since currently only one county has reported the plague, we should just set fire to everything and burn it all. It would be easy to resolve. But the old man refuses, the emperor continued. He insists on using death as a threat. He was munching on a bunch of fresh grapes as he spoke, seemingly helpless, seeking my agreement. After all, he's my teacher. If I force him to his death, won't those censors use it to undermine my position? I quickly recalled recent news in my mind and understood. I've heard that in the court, Lord Ning suggested sending the crown prince south to manage the disaster, and the empress also intends to have General Gu accompany him as protection. This disaster in Xinzhou, followed by the plague, had not only prompted the officials to submit memorials, but had also caused scholars from various regions to submit joint petitions. With the full support of the Ning family, if the crown prince were to successfully manage the disaster, his prestige and power would surely grow even more. The crown prince is only about 12 years old, Emperor Chongjia snorted. If something happens, I won't feel at ease. It's better for you to go. Also, keep an eye on Gu Qing. So that was the true reason for my summons today. Although General Gu Xingyan could no longer lead the northern campaigns, his outstanding abilities made him highly sought after by all factions. As expected, my elder brother was still the same, short-sighted and selfish, with no concern for the lives of the common people, only interested in securing his own throne. In my previous life, the plague in Xinzhou had also struck suddenly, but it was not given proper attention at first. The local government concealed the reports, the provincial authorities shirked their responsibilities, and the capital was mired in factional infighting. By the time the seriousness of the situation was realized, much of the southern region had already fallen to the plague. Although the court eventually dispatched many capable officials to oversee the affected areas, I was also sent to Xinzhou to take charge. The plague still dealt an irreversible blow to the kingdom of Dali. So, after being reborn, I immediately sent word to several neutral censors to escalate the issue. I then had Hanyu lead a team to search for medical assistance on the nearby Nantan Island, not far from Xinzhou. Based on the experience and knowledge from my previous life, I was well prepared for the disaster relief mission, which was still within my control. But there were unforeseen circumstances. For instance, Gu Xingyan, who had fallen ill after the welcoming banquet in my previous life, was not following the same path. Over 10 days later, the disaster relief team set off with great momentum, and after a few rest stops along the way, it would take almost another month to reach Xinzhou. It was too slow, and I instinctively frowned. Xinzhou, affected by floods and plagued by disease, would surely not have enough food or medicine in the provincial stores to sustain the people. Instances of people resorting to cannibalism were highly likely. I called for the eunuch Qian and ordered him to take a royal decree to the neighboring Yi and Jin provinces to requisition grain and medicine. We are only tasked with overseeing the mission. We have not received any other orders, he said, narrowing his eyes in a voice that suggested he was here to monitor me. Clearly, he did not take me seriously. By this point, the relief team had already left the capital, and I was done being polite with these eunuch lackeys. I immediately ordered the guards to bind him. Cui, after the body is buried, take a team to requisition grain and medicine quickly. Little Cui thrust the shovel into the ground and responded with a firm yes. General Gu, I turned to the man behind me. Please arrange a light cavalry, quick and fast. I will head to Xinzhou first to assess the situation. Your Highness, isn't this against the rules? Gu Xingyan asked, his handsome features showing surprise as he subtly questioned me. The eunuch officials from the emperor's side, who had been watching me closely, were now being disposed of, which did not fit the image of the always obedient princess that was commonly spread in the capital. The relief mission is under my full command. You just follow my orders, I said as I passed by him, my fingers brushing against the sword at his side. Hurry, my dear brother. With the ears and eyes of the eunuchs eliminated, it was just a matter of sending a letter. Thanks to Xia Chaoying, who had a brilliant ability to forge handwriting, everything would be handled seamlessly, leaving no suspicion. According to the developments from my previous life, the conflict between the imperial factions would soon escalate, and with the power struggles in the capital, the noble families would be too preoccupied to pay attention to Xinzhou. This would allow me to deal with the disaster without interference. Gu Xingyan's questioning seemed irrelevant at first, but in truth, he was testing my resolve for this mission. Soon, he dispatched a 100-man guard, and after several boxes of medicine and a few physicians were loaded onto the carriage, I tightened my sleeves and mounted my horse. Seeing this, Gu Xingyan raised an eyebrow but did not attempt to stop me. We rode swiftly, only stopping for rest at the post stations late at night, and after several days of non-stop travel, we finally arrived in Huajing County, where the plague had first erupted. I wasn't a man of robust strength, and after being jostled for so long, my back and waist were sore, and by the time we neared the last stretch, I was gritting my teeth to keep going. When we arrived at the city gates, we were already in a disheveled state, covered in dust. The guards didn't recognize my identity and demanded, "The relief team for the Long Princess is still on its way." "Who are you?" A group of thieves pretending to be nobles. The medical officers frantically searched for the princess's insignia in the carriage, while Gu Xingyan, with arms crossed, looked at me leisurely. Yuxian said His Highness is renowned for her beauty far and wide, but it seems the scope is quite limited. I smoothed the wrinkles in my sleeve, having changed into uncomfortable clothes at the post station. Hearing his remark, I retorted, "General Gu has achieved great military feats, yet he's been mistaken for a thief as well, hasn't he?" The guards, now urging us to move along, added, "The city is under lockdown, and no one is allowed to enter or leave freely. Hurry up." Gu Xingyan rubbed the tip of his nose, leaned in, and asked, "Can you force the gate open?" I stopped him, pressing down on the half-drawn sword at his side, and said, "Let's wait a little longer." As we neared Xinzhou, I had already made arrangements. People had been dispatched to the provincial government to deliver messages. Finally, after the medical officers found the insignia, the governor and magistrate of Xinzhou came down from another recently arrived carriage, rushing over to apologize to me, trembling in fear. The main street of Huajing County was eerily quiet. The nearby buildings either had their doors and windows tightly shut, or were left in a state of chaos, looted and emptied. Governor Chen quickly reported to me while signaling to others standing nearby. Although it was commonly said that a major plague would follow a flood, this one was unusual. Infected individuals first showed symptoms of cold-like conditions, coughing, dizziness, chills, and after a few days, their skin would become red, swollen, and ulcerated. None of the external remedies seemed to work and only exacerbated the pus-filled wounds. Most people died from the agony. Is the source of the disease identified? Governor Chen remained silent and looked at the county magistrate, who had hurried here after hearing the news. It was clear he was trying to avoid responsibility. The county magistrate stammered, saying the plague spread quickly and no officials who went to investigate survived. All they knew was that it had started in a village downstream from Chushui. If I had known this earlier, I would have taken a deep breath and said, "Lead the way." In my previous life, it had taken the physicians a long time just to locate the source, and if we waited for them to find the right medicine, the disaster would have only worsened. All I could do now was to find the origin as quickly as possible. Gu Xingyan furrowed his brow and disagreed. "Your Highness has been traveling for days. It's too risky. I'll go instead." I ignored the first part of his sentence, replying, "All right, General Gu is strong and healthy. If anything were to happen to me, you can take over the relief efforts." My tone left no room for argument, and Gu Xingyan knew I was serious. "It seems you and I have different understandings of this situation," he said. "What's different? Was my rebirth something to be questioned?" "In Huajing, from the nobility to the commoners, everyone says the Long Princess is mad," he said, his face half covered by a cloth, but his black eyes sparkling with amusement. "The soldiers in the northern frontier think the same." "General Gu, you are mistaken," I replied with a sense of self-awareness. "They certainly recognize my beauty." As we reached a long staircase descending, I nearly tripped, but Gu Xingyan caught me in time. Once steady, I noticed him slightly leaning forward, extending a fist, his deep voice naturally shifting the conversation. The stairs are narrow. Your Highness, be careful. I lightly placed my hand on his arm, my heart pounding. Thank you. The plague in Heishui County originated from a farmer in a village downstream of Chushui. When the water levels rose, the flood submerged the farmlands, bringing many river fish ashore. Unable to find food after the water disaster, the farmer risked going back to collect some dead fish to eat. After several days, others in the village followed suit, and whatever fish they found on the shore was boiled into a big pot. The medical officers initially concluded that the source of the disease came from the dead fish that the villagers had collected. But the Heishui County officials, seeking to avoid trouble, had already burned the entire village down. If not for the early rumors, we would have never known. Fortunately, at this time, Hong Yu arrived with Zheng Huaji and Zheng Yuji, two renowned doctors from Nantan Island. They were familiar with all kinds of waterborne diseases, and in my previous life, the remedy for this plague had been developed by them. Meanwhile, I ordered the dismissal and imprisonment of over 10 officials from Heishui County. Xinzhou, being a fertile land, had always produced abundant grain. Even though this year's crops were significantly reduced due to flooding, Heishui County's granaries shouldn't have been so lacking that the common people were forced to scavenge dead fish to survive. An investigation revealed that local officials had been colluding with merchants to profit from public grain. The county's granaries were nearly empty, but the officials' private homes were stacked with boxes of silver. Governor Chen was nearly fainting in shock and stammered that he had no knowledge of this. If the situation wasn't still unstable, I would have overturned the entire Xinzhou government by now. The Zheng brothers, experienced as they were, quickly formulated a new remedy with the help of several physicians I had brought from Huajing, and under Chen Chen's nervous supervision, the medicine was distributed to the people. Although the situation seemed to improve, I hadn't yet relaxed when another problem arose. Dr. Zheng's remedy should be fine, but for some reason, after taking it, the people have developed high fevers, and some are even coughing up blood, Chen Chen reported anxiously as he cleared the way ahead. I don't know where the rumors started, but now they're saying that Your Highness came here to massacre the city, and that after being discovered, you poisoned them. From the city wall, I looked down at a throng of people, shouting to leave the city. Xie Chaoying had sent word yesterday that the Emperor's officials had purged most of the eunuchs aligned with the Empress, and there would likely be bigger moves soon. It seemed they didn't intend for me to manage the relief effort smoothly. I narrowed my eyes and coldly ordered, "Shoot down those in the front." The archers hesitated for a moment, but then Gu Xingyan stepped forward, taking the bow from them and, without hesitation, drawing the string. 3 arrows flew, all hitting their targets. At that moment, the arrows from the city wall also rained down, and those at the front of the crowd collapsed in a row. The fear of death stunned the remaining people, who froze in place, no longer daring to move forward. At this point, someone in the crowd raised their arms and shouted again. "Did you see? The Long Princess really is going to massacre the city. We can't." I didn't let him finish, locking eyes with him and commanding, "The one speaking, shoot him." With that, the instigator was silenced. Gu Xingyan tossed the bow aside and pressed his hand on Chen Chen's shoulder, speaking calmly, "Governor Chen, it's your turn to speak." Chen Chen, perhaps not expecting my decisiveness, stood frozen for a while before beginning to loudly try to pacify the people. Faced with the unwarranted panic caused by rumors, I preferred a direct and decisive approach to quell the unrest. The medicine proved effective, and the first batch of patients who experienced high fever and coughing blood quickly recovered, with no more skin ulcerations. Soon after, Xiao Chui and the Southern Relief Team arrived in Xinzhou, and the situation gradually stabilized. My elder brother, the Emperor, hastily urged me to return to the capital. Chen Chen and the others swore to atone for their mistakes by performing great deeds. I left people behind to keep watch before I felt secure enough to depart. I've finished my business here. What about you, General Gu? I asked while inspecting my tired eyes in a bronze mirror, feeling the pain of the dark circles beneath them. The Crown Prince failed in his southern campaign, so Her Majesty sent me on this journey to find a chance to eliminate you, Gu Xingyan replied casually from his horse, playing with the whip in his hand. I paused for a moment, then couldn't help but smile. Then you'd better hurry up. No need. Consider it my incompetence, he said directly, his eyes fixed on me. I can't do it. Gu Xingyan, are you defecting to me? I put down the mirror and asked in a low voice. He didn't answer but casually remarked, I've heard the Crown Princess and the Prince Consort have no harmony. When will you divorce him? Xiao Chui, who was drinking water, choked and quickly jumped off the carriage seat with Hong Yu, running off in a hurry. I was just joking, Your Highness, please don't mind, Gu Xingyan added with a smile. Seeing that I didn't respond, he continued, but I really don't want to follow Her Majesty anymore. Emperor Chongjia had long feared military generals and weakened the power of the aristocracy. After the 12 cities in the northern border fell, many noble families with military backgrounds were left helpless, unable to fulfill their ambitions. This was why Gu Xingyan had joined the Empress's faction. She gathered many ministers under the banner of recovering lost territories, and the pro-war faction even managed to get the chance to launch a northern expedition. However, during that campaign, Gu Xingyan discovered something troubling. The Empress's faction had secretly reached an agreement with the Khagan of the Northern Rome, using the guise of unity to communicate with the enemy on the battlefield. The Emperor despised the power of the Ning clan, increasingly suspicious of the Crown Prince, and favored the Empress and eunuchs. The Empress, failing to secure her position, had even planned to ask the Northern Rome for help to dethrone the Emperor and place the Crown Prince on the throne. Hearing this, I sneered. All my nephews are fools, pampered only to eat, drink, and play. The Crown Prince is no different. I think supporting the Crown Prince is just an excuse to fulfill the Ning clan's true ambition of taking control. Gu Xingyan might be excellent at battle, but his choice of faction showed poor judgment. It seemed his eyesight was impaired. He wasn't angry, instead asking, and what of Emperor Jiaqing? Is he a wise ruler? Of course not. I was not foolish either. In my past life, I had willingly become my elder brother's tool, bearing the blame for everything because my mother was in his hands. The struggle for the throne during the latter part of my father's reign had been chaotic, and I had no idea when my mother was taken by Emperor Chongjia. He used her as leverage to force me to work for him. It wasn't until the last days of my life that I learned she had been tortured and died soon after, and they had used a substitute to deceive me. No wonder they always made me view her through a curtain. It was to keep the secret. After my rebirth, I had looked into this matter, but it was already too late. But now, things were different. I beckoned to Gu Xingyan, and he leaned closer to listen. Just then, Xiao Chui returned, laughing mischievously outside the carriage, asking why the conversation had moved inside. Having lived through 2 lifetimes and grown a few years older, I remained calm, neither flustered nor embarrassed. Meanwhile, Gu Xingyan, usually so mean-spirited, now had a faint flush on his ears, hurriedly moving to lift the curtain and get out of the carriage. Hong Yu didn't let him off either and teased, General Gu, how can you shake my princess's resolve to divorce? I never intended to continue playing games with Ning Xiao. When Gu Xingyan defected, Emperor Chongjia generously asked me what reward I wanted. I seized the opportunity to ask for a divorce from Ning Xiao, and he readily agreed. Soon after Gu Xingyan returned to the capital, he was immediately dispatched to escort envoys from the western regions. Life in Huajing seemed peaceful, as if it were in an unusual balance. However, nearby Izhou had recently seen a group of mountain bandits. Their numbers were small, and the local militia could easily handle them, but Emperor Chongjia ordered me to lead a campaign against them. I thought my emperor brother and his empress were at odds before I left. Why are they suddenly so affectionate, like newlyweds? I asked, gently waving my fan. Xia Chaoying frowned, reviewing the current situation. She couldn't pinpoint what fell off. She was good at imitating handwriting. After her miscarriage, Gu Xingyan While recuperating at home, she had written a few anonymous memorials in different tones and styles. One denounced the emperor for favoring corrupt eunuchs and neglecting state affairs, while another subtly mocked the empress for relying on powerful families to control the young crown prince, aiming to seize power. Both sides thought the other had written them, and their conflict intensified, making it clear that Emperor Chongjia was planning to depose the crown prince. It wasn't surprising if the empress's faction tried to seize power, but what puzzled me was why, after I returned to the capital, both sides had suddenly reconciled. Just then, Xiao Chui came in and asked if we needed to prepare medicine for injuries during the bandit extermination campaign. Xia Chaoying, who had been silently thinking, suddenly raised her head and answered, "Yes. Your Highness, there may be a danger to your life in this mission," she said calmly. "I've never understood why General Gu was sent with you for the escort. Whether he's from the Emperor's or Empress's faction, he shouldn't have been sent away at this time." I suddenly realized, unless they've discovered that Gu Xingyan has defected to me. Xie Chaoying nodded. After the disaster relief in Xinzhou, my reputation was restored, contrasting sharply with the Emperor and Empress, who were burdened with public resentment. Years of acting and hiding had aroused Emperor Chongjia's suspicion. He finally realized that some of the things he had tightly controlled were being slowly undermined by me. The Emperor's absolute authority was under threat, so he chose to temporarily ally with the Empress, planning to eliminate me first. The bandits I was sent to deal with were not just ordinary criminals, they were a plot to get rid of me. It seems that the saying, "the imperial family is the most heartless," was indeed true. On the day I left the capital to eliminate the bandits, the Emperor and Empress personally sent me off, giving me detailed instructions without a trace of sincerity. I smiled and playfully pinched the young crown prince's nose, telling him to be good and grow up well. But the young prince, who had always been at odds with me, sneezed and then rudely pushed me away. "How dare you be so rude to your imperial aunt?" Emperor Chongjia raised his hand and lightly slapped the back of the young prince's head, while Empress Ning smiled and apologized, creating a particularly warm scene. And just as they wished, I was ambushed on my way to Yizhou. Xie Chaoqing said that Gu Xingyan would be exposed as my person, and that it must have been a spy from the princess's mansion. Sure enough, what should have been a well-controlled assassination attempt was suddenly disrupted when one of my maids drew a dagger from her sleeve and lunged at me. There was no way to avoid it, and nearby, Xiao Chui and Hong Yu simultaneously screamed in terror. At the critical moment, the maid was kicked away by someone. I was pulled into a man's strong arms, and the surrounding swordplay seemed to be cut off, as if by an invisible barrier. "Gu Xingyan?" I asked in surprise. "Aren't you supposed to escort the emissary?" "I was," he replied while holding me, using one hand to wield a spear and forcing several assassins to retreat. "But then I thought you might need more protection, so I came back." Not only did he return, but he also brought 2,000 Gu family soldiers with him. This army had originally been only half its current size, following Gu's father into battle. Later, it grew to its current size of over 20,000 soldiers as Gu Xingyan fought against the northern Rong tribes. Xiao Chui, excited, eagerly asked if we were finally preparing to rebel. "No, we're still heading to Yizhou to quell the bandits." At this point, Huajing was about to enter the final stage of a struggle between two factions. I didn't want to get involved at this time. When the news of Princess Wenhua's death reached the capital, it caused much regret among the people. Emperor Chongjia was deeply sorrowful and personally oversaw the funeral. Little did anyone know that at this very moment, Yizhou had already been secured, and 2,000 soldiers were stationed outside the city, waiting for the right moment. Half a month later, Xie Chaoqing, having figured out the situation, disguised herself and came to find me. Right now, His Majesty has almost been sidelined, and the Empress controls 3,000 soldiers from the Imperial Guard and the Capital Patrol. Xie Chaoqing paused thoughtfully and glanced at Gu Xingyan. He understood and calmly said, "General Yu's 10,000 soldiers, right? Don't worry, they won't come into conflict with His Highness." "Well, Afterward, I will trouble General Gu to properly thank Miss Yu on my behalf, I said casually, smiling. Thank her for what? Gu Xingyan, now more audacious, still respectfully called me Your Highness, but naturally drew closer to me. Xia Chaoqing noticed the change in atmosphere and immediately turned to leave. Your Highness still owes me a heavy favor. Don't forget it. He buried his head in the crook of my neck, his deep voice brushing against my ear as he reminded me of the promise I made in the icy vault of Xingtian Palace. I teased him on purpose, pulling away with a little force, stepping back a bit. Your words are not pleasant. I don't like them. Then does the Duke's words sound pleasant? Gu Xingyan leaned in again, so close that our breaths almost mingled. It's former Duke, I corrected, confused by how he suddenly started acting like we were in a secret romance. He said I'm a lunatic, and anyone who marries me will have an unsettled home. That's not true. Gu Xingyan corrected me seriously. Your Highness is the brightest flower in Dali, meant to bloom on the dragon throne, not locked in the back chambers. It was a sweet confession. I looked up, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. 3 days later, the Empress launched a palace coup and put Emperor Chongjia under house arrest. But soon after, 2,000 Gu family soldiers and my 5,000 private soldiers, all under the pretext of aiding the emperor, entered Huajing. It was General Yu who opened the gates. Your Highness, you're still alive. That's great. She was so happy that she wanted to hug me, but stopped when Gu Xingyan, expressionless, pointed his spear at her forehead. Here, my father and I are here, just rest assured, General Yu said, unable to leave her post as gatekeeper. She could only reluctantly wave goodbye. Remember to play polo with me someday. Among all of my father's children, I was the most skilled at riding and archery. At my coming-of-age ceremony on the grasslands, I defeated everyone and won first place, and it was that match that inspired this girl to learn polo. It seemed someone still remembered. Princess Wenhua was not entirely without merit. With Gu Xingyan's command, our army quickly overwhelmed the palace. The Empress, Ningshi, collapsed to the ground, her face full of disbelief. Li Qianye, you didn't die. Soon, her dazed expression was replaced by a wild realization. She tried to rush at me, but was tackled by the guards. It's you. You're the one who harmed my son, aren't you? She screamed. I lowered my gaze and smiled lightly. That day, before I left, I had hidden poison powder in my nails, dyed with madder. No one saw it, but it drifted into the young prince's nostrils when I pinched his nose. It was a small amount, not enough to kill, but it would keep him asleep indefinitely. Ningxi's ambition was to become regent, so she had kept it a secret from everyone, continuing her plans as usual. Ever since Emperor Chongjia had been sidelined, the power she could easily seize had become even more tempting. She was too eager, not even confirming whether I was really dead. What about your brother? I asked a question that no one had expected. You want to save your brother? Truly deep sibling love. Ningshi gasped, tears streaming down her face, but then she laughed cruelly. Do you know who ruined your reputation all these years? You were nothing more than a knife used by him to do his dirty work. Once you were used, you were discarded. Even your mother died early. How could you still think of saving him? After many years of marriage, Ningxi's hatred for Emperor Chongjia had reached its peak. I bent down and whispered in her ear, Thank you for publicly clearing my name in front of all the officials and ministers in this hall. It was only then that Ningxi realized she had fallen into my trap, but she no longer had the chance to speak. Xiao Chui stuffed a cloth into her mouth and signaled the guards to drag her away. The 5 gates of the Golden Luan Hall were wide open. Gu Xingyan, holding his spear, led the army, filling the streets outside, their intentions clear. As the tutor of 3 emperors, Xia Taifu stepped forward, trembling, wanting to protect the old feudal system. Grandfather. Xia Chaoqing removed her veil and looked at him with intense eyes. I turned and took a step toward the dragon throne. The grandfather and granddaughter stared at each other for a long time. Finally, Xia Taifu bent down and welcomed his fourth emperor. In the 12th year of Emperor Chongjia's reign, Princess Wenhua revolted and seized the throne. Of course, as the ultimate victor, I would not allow the historians to write it that way. It should be recorded that in the 12th year of Chongjia, the nation faced great hardship. The emperor, crown prince, and all the princes were secretly harmed by the empress, Ningshi, whose crimes were so great that her death was of no consequence. The princess, in accordance with the will of heaven, took over the throne and established the Taiyan era.